evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out for our third Community Reads conversation with the library and Racing for Equity. My name is Keisha Hamilton, and I am the chair for Racing for Equity, and we're excited again to have this conversation with you all tonight. This helps me know what we're doing tonight, right? So Racing for Equity, who we are, these are our mission, vision, and values. The mission of Racing for Equity is that we are a group of passionate people working together for equity in Jackson County through fair and equitable practices. The vision of Racing for Equity, we desire to see Jackson County as a place where people of color thrive and succeed, making it an inclusive place for all. The values of Racing for Equity are based on desire. D, we value diversity. E, we value empathy. S, we value social justice. I, we value integrity. R, we value restorative practices. And E, we value engagement. So Racing for Equity, the group of us who are Racing for Equity members, we formed after we attended Facing Race, Race Forward in November of 2018 in Detroit. There were quite a few people in Jackson who went, but about 60 or so of us who came back decided that we wanted to take the information that we learned at that conference and do something with it. Many of them are actually in this room tonight. And so when we formed, we came up with this. And a part of our efforts to advance racial equity in the city of Jackson, we said, what else can we do? So we came up with a whole bunch of different ideas. COVID hit, and all those ideas kind of we couldn't really do anything with them. But then we kept thinking about what else could we do. One of the main things that we realized needed to happen in Jackson was to have conversations. Awareness brings people to places that they aren't at already. So part of awareness would be reading books. And so we talked to our library folks who also were doing a lot of work here at the library and said, hey, look, how can we partner to bring that awareness? And so we came up with these Community Reads conversations idea. This is our third conversation this year. The first conversation was earlier this year. The book that we read was So You Want to Talk About Race. I'm not going to say her name because I always get it wrong. But anyways, it's called So You Want to Talk About Race. And then the second book that we read was this one, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee. And we did it in two parts because it's such a big, thick book, and there's so much amazing information in there that we wanted to share with each other that we didn't want to miss. So these are the panelists tonight that some of them are here, some of them are not. I did get a couple calls today from Maisha and Ebony. They had some pretty intense things that came up unexpectedly, which kept them from coming tonight. They did want to be here, and they apologize for not being here, but they're not here. They won't be here. Davita should be coming. Would you like to speak, Becky, and then Ann?
Sure. My name is Becky McKinney. I'm a retired teacher, so I don't have my teacher voice anymore. I'm very appreciative of this mic. And I was invited to be a part of the Racing for Equity group a while back, and I've really appreciated the conversations. And I'm very thankful that the library is giving us this forum, because these are hard conversations, and I just don't know how you find people to talk things through if you don't have an opportunity like this. So I'm really glad for that.
And my name is Ann Frost, and I'm the Carnegie Branch Manager here at Jackson District Library. And I attended the Facing Race, Race Forward conference in 2018 and have been privileged to remain a part of this group. I am excited that you all are here and ready to talk about the Sum of Us.
All right, so our meeting agreements for tonight, this is really just so that we can kind of stay on target a little bit. I'm the facilitator person up here. But if you don't mind stating your name and at least the chapter or the theme when you're commenting, that's there. But if you don't know the chapter or even the theme, that's okay. Just kind of blurting out your questions, totally fine. But if you do know, it kind of helps the panelists who have prepared with different chapters to kind of get an idea of what might be coming, and so their brains can kind of cue in. Again, if you don't have the chapter or theme, it's okay. Be respectful of our differences of opinion. We know that talking about race and race issues is not often had because it's such a touchy subject, so we just want to be respectful in our conversations and respectful of our differences. Everyone's experience is valuable. Please speak on your own experience. Please remain on topic of this book or the things found in it, or just on issues of race. So don't feel like if you didn't read the book, because some of us did not come prepared for our quiz, and that's okay. But if you haven't read the book and it's about race and you want to ask the question, feel free to ask it. We do have some, a lot of us do a lot of study and work in this area, so we probably have some ideas around answers to your questions. We acknowledge and agree that racist ideas and practices are in our society and have a significant impact on our collective success, which is why we're having these conversations. And then the last thing is respect our facilitator. That's me. I'll keep the conversation moving. I might do some singing or some dancing around or something to kind of get you to know that, hey, it's time to stop talking, just so we can kind of get everybody's opinions and questions and comments, and et cetera. Okay, so that's me. Again, I'm the Racing for Equity chair. I've been the chair since it began. I did start as a secretary. That was the position that I volunteered for. Somehow I became the co-chair. I'm a resident of Jackson. I do a lot of work around racial equity. I'm a mom to 6. And I also chair the City of Jackson's Racial Equity Commission. Okay, so before we go on, Davida, how do you feel? Do you feel like introducing yourself right now? Or do you want me to give you a couple seconds?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, no, I'm Davida Quinn,
You got a microphone too, just so you know.
and I am thrilled to be here, and I'm happy you are here tonight, too, because we're going to be getting into some deep stuff tonight.
Welcome. Thank you. Okay, so zero-sum theory, that's what the book is basically about. So many white Americans view race as a zero-sum game. There's an us and a them, and what's good for them is bad for us. That's the zero-sum theory rationale. This rationale animates our public policies even today. When those who benefit from our country's drastic economic inequality sell the zero-sum story to block public support for any collective action that benefits us all, from universal health care to living wages. There's an elephant in the room that I'm about to address right now. I talk fast. I'm slowing myself down. That's how I slow myself down. We are actually going to watch a video because, again, we do have a pop quiz tonight for you all that you're not really going to have to take. But in order for us to kind of orient our whole minds about what we're talking about here, just in case some of us have not read the book, we're going to watch a short video. I'm calling it short. Don't look at the time frame on it. Just watch.
I am a public policy wonk. I investigate data that points to problems in the American economy. Problems like rising household debt, declining wages and benefits, shortfalls in public revenue. And I try to pinpoint solutions to make our economy more prosperous for more people. I geek out about tax policy and infrastructure investments, and I get really excited by a gracefully designed regulatory regime. These are the kinds of topics that I was talking about on a public television live call-in show in August of 2016. I was about halfway through the program when a man called in, identified as Gary from North Carolina, and he said, "I'm a white male and I'm prejudiced." He then went on to detail his prejudice, talking about black men and gangs and drugs and crime. But then he said something that I'll never forget. He said, "But I want to change, and I want to know what I can do to become a better American." Now, remember, my career is about economic policy, as translated into dollars and cents, not personal thoughts and feelings. But when I opened my mouth to respond to this man on live television, the most surprising words came out. I said, "Thank you." I thanked him for admitting his prejudice, for wanting to change, and for knowing somehow that that would make him a better American. The exchange between Gary and me went viral. It's been viewed over 8 million times and inspired waves of social media commentary and news coverage. And I think people were surprised that a black woman would show such compassion for a prejudiced white man, and they were surprised that a white man would admit his bias on national television. Not long after Gary and my viral moment, we met in person. He said that he had taken my advice. He said that my words had been like someone wiped the dust from a window and let the light in. Over the years, Gary and I have become friends. And Gary would tell you that I've taught him a lot about systemic racism in America and public policy, but I've learned a lot from Gary too. And the biggest lesson for me has been that Gary's prejudice has caused him to suffer. Fear, anxiety, isolation. And it's made me rethink many of the economic problems I've been focusing on my entire career. I wondered, is it possible that our society's racism has likewise been backfiring on the very same people set up to benefit from privilege? Driven by this question, I've spent the past few years traveling the country, researching and writing a book. My conclusion? Racism leads to bad policymaking. It's making our economy worse. And not just in ways that disadvantage people of color. It turns out it's not a zero sum. Racism is bad for white people too. Take, for example, America's underinvestment in our public goods, the things that we all need that we share in common, our schools and roads and bridges. Our infrastructure gets a D+ from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and we invest less per capita than almost every other advanced nation. But it wasn't always this way. I traveled to Montgomery, Alabama, and there I saw how racism can destroy a public good and the public will to support it. In the 1930s and 40s, the United States went on a nationwide building boom of public amenities funded by tax dollars, which in Montgomery, Alabama included the Oak Park Pool, which was the grandest one for miles. You know, back then, people didn't have air conditioners, and so they spent their hot summer days in a steady rotation of sunning and splashing and then cooling off under a ring of nearby trees. It was the meeting place for the town. Except the Oak Park Pool, though it was funded by all of Montgomery's citizens, was for whites only. When a federal court finally deemed this unconstitutional, the reaction of the town council was swift. Effective January 1st, 1959, they decided they would drain the public pool rather than let black families swim too. This destruction of public goods was replicated across the country in towns, not just in the South. Towns closed their public parks, pools, and schools, all in response to desegregation orders, all throughout the 1960s. In Montgomery, they shut down the entire Parks Department for a decade. They closed the recreation centers. They even sold off the animals in the zoo. Today, you can walk the grounds of Oak Park, as I did, but very few people do. They never rebuilt the pool. Racism has a cost for everyone. I remember having that same thought on September 15th, 2008, when I learned the breaking news that Lehman Brothers was collapsing. Now, Lehman was like the other financial firms that would go under in the coming days, done in by overexposure to a toxic financial instrument based on something that used to be simple and safe, a 30-year fixed-rate home loan. But the mortgages at the center and the root of the financial crisis had strange new terms. And they were developed and aggressively marketed for years in black and brown middle-class communities, like the one that I visited when I met a homeowner named Glenn. Glenn had owned a home on a leafy street in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Cleveland for over a decade. But when I met him, he was near foreclosure. Like nearly all of his neighbors, he'd received a knock on the door from a broker promising to refinance his mortgage. But what the broker didn't tell him was that this was a new kind of mortgage. A mortgage with an inflated interest rate and a balloon payment and a prepayment penalty if he tried to get out of it. Now, the common misperception then and still today is that people like Glenn were buying properties they couldn't afford, that they themselves were risky borrowers. I saw how this stereotype made it harder for policymakers to see the crisis for what it was back when we still had time to stop it. But that's all it was, a stereotype. The majority of subprime mortgages went to people who had good credit, like Glenn. And African Americans and Latinos were 3 times as likely, even if they had good credit, than white people to get sold these toxic loans. The problem wasn't the borrower, the problem was the loan. After the crash, most of the nation's big lenders, from Wells Fargo to Countrywide, would go on to be fined for racial discrimination. But that realization came too late. These loans, super profitable for the lenders, but designed to fail for the borrowers, spread out past the confines of black and brown neighborhoods like Glenn's and into the whiter mortgage market. All of the nation's big Wall Street firms bet on these loans. At its peak, 1 out of every 5 mortgages in the country was in this mold. And the crisis that my colleagues and I saw coming, would go on to cost us all $19 trillion in lost wealth, pensions, home equity, savings. 8 million jobs vanished. A home ownership rate that has never recovered. My years of advocating in vain for homeowners like Glenn left me convinced we would not have had a financial crisis if it weren't for racism. In 2017, I traveled to Mississippi, where a group of auto factory workers was trying to organize into a union. Now, the benefits they were fighting for, higher pay, better health care coverage, a real pension, they would have helped everybody at the plant. But in person after person that I talked to, white, black, for the union, against the union, race kept coming up. A white man named Joey put it this way. He said, white workers think, I ain't voting yes if the blacks are voting yes. If the blacks are for it, I'm against it. A white man named Chip told me, the idea is that if you uplift black people, you're down in white people. It's like the world's got this crab in a barrel mentality. Now, the union vote failed. Wages at the plant are still lower than their unionized peers, and people there still worry about their health care. You know, it's tempting, perhaps, to focus on the prejudiced attitudes of the men and the workers that I heard in Mississippi. But I'm more interested in holding accountable the people who are selling racist ideas for their profit than those who are desperate enough to buy it. My travels also took me to places where I saw, however, that it doesn't have to be this way. I went to Maine, the whitest state in the nation, the oldest, where there are more deaths every year than births, and I went to this dying mill town called Lewiston that is being revitalized by new people, mostly African, mostly Muslim, immigrants and refugees. There I met a woman named Cecile, whose parents had been part of the last wave of new people to come to Lewiston. These are French-Canadian mill workers at the turn of the century. Cecile was retired, but she had found a new purpose in life by organizing Congolese refugees to join with the white retirees at the Franco Heritage Center. These men and women from the Congo were helping these retirees remember the French that they hadn't spoken since their childhoods. And together, these two communities helped each other feel at home. You know, for all the political talk about the newcomers being a drain on the town, a bipartisan think tank found that the local refugee community there created $40 million in tax revenue and $130 million in income. And I talked to the town administrator who was boasting about the fact that Lewiston was building a new school when all the rest of towns like theirs in Maine was closing them. You know, it costs us so much to remain divided. This zero-sum thinking that what's good for one group has to come at the expense of another, it's what's gotten us into this mess. I believe it's time to reject that old paradigm and realize that our fates are linked. An injury to one is an injury to all. You know, we have a choice. Our nation was founded on a belief in a hierarchy of human value. But we are about to be a country with no racial majority. So we can keep pretending like we're not all on the same team. We can keep sabotaging our success and hamstringing our own players. Or we can let the proximity of so much difference reveal our common humanity. And we can finally invest in our greatest asset, our people. All of our people. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for allowing me to show that somewhat long TED Talk. I thought it was a really good way for us to kind of get our thoughts together around the book so that we don't have to have a pop quiz and we can just jump right into conversation. All right, any thoughts that come up from that video, either from the panelists or from you all? I'm gonna give you all time to speak. I'll run and bring this to you. Whoever has a question, a thought, a comment, anything that came up from that, or from the book itself as well. We'll keep the light on if that's okay.
Okay.
We'll keep them on.
Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
if I could share, it stood out to me as I was reading through this, the many, many ways that racism costs everyone. The chapter that I focused on was on voting. You know, we hear the elementary school version of our history that this country was founded on these wonderful ideals, but we have to acknowledge that the framers of the Constitution compromised their ideals from the beginning. That's directly from the book. The original design of our country was minority rule. Only the wealthiest white men could vote. Women couldn't vote for over a century. The franchise was limited to those wealthy enough to own slaves. And there was slavery. I mean, that's another obvious breach of these ideals of all men are created equal. And the idea of the 3/5 compromise, the rigging of the system to count enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation, and yet to not allow them to vote. I mean, just one thing after another, our country had these great ideas that sound wonderful in the original documents, but in fact didn't happen. And the impact on white people, as Heather stated again and again, they also were disenfranchised. If you weren't a wealthy enough white person to own property, you didn't get to vote. And today, the big donation, the money in politics, makes it almost a requirement again that you must have property to have a strong voice in our country. Example after example, similar to the example that she gave of the closing of the white pool, there were examples in our history of violence by whites when blacks were able to vote. They burned down their own government buildings rather than allowing black people to vote. And the poll taxes that were enacted, those impacted white people too. Poor white people couldn't vote because they also didn't have the money to pay this poll tax. In Florida, just recently, there was a ballot measure that allowed formerly incarcerated people to vote, and that benefited mostly white people. But now they're again facing the poll tax of having to pay their outstanding fees and fines before they can vote. The photo ID requirement. White people have difficulty obtaining ID as well. And also young people 17 to 20 have difficulty sometimes meeting all the requirements for voting. There's a recent move to purge the voter rolls if you haven't voted in the last election or two. But as Heather points out, voting is not a use it or lose it right. It is always your right to vote. But 7% of the Americans who were registered were purged from the voter rolls. So, you know, I can go on and on, but these are just things that stand out to me of how trying to rig the system to maintain a minority rule, to limit the voices of particular populations, costs everyone.
Thank you. So very true. It's really interesting. And those of us who read the book, you know, I think we all, you know, recognize that one of the things that we don't talk about enough when it comes to racism is the impact that it has on white people.
Since you were talking about the voting, there was talk about how they were taking away people's voter registration and they didn't know it, they show up to vote. And then there was an it's in the United States, if you don't buy a gun for several years, you do not lose your Second Amendment right to bear arms. If you never read a letter to the editor or participate in a street demonstration, you retain your full First Amendment rights to free speech. If you skip church, the government can't stop you from finally attending a service. But despite our contemporary reverence for the idea of equality under the law, the truth is the Constitution wasn't written with an affirmative right to vote for all citizens. That was reading from the book. My name is Alicia, by the way. I know you said to introduce ourselves, and I didn't last time. So that point that, they even went to the Supreme Court and Ohio was still allowed to take people's voter registration rights away. So it's just wild that you can't take people's rights to have a gun, but you can take their rights to vote.
I forget, I don't know if I read that somewhere as well, that same thing as far as, them comparing, your gun rights, taking that, they don't take that away if you don't own a gun.
Yeah.
Ever, you always have it, but if you don't vote, which is one of the most important duties, civic responsibilities and privileges that we have as citizens of the United States of America, that is to participate in our democracy. The idea that if I don't, that you're gonna take it from me is just like you said, wild. When you were talking, I was like, yeah, wild. Any other thoughts or comments from our panelists or otherwise? And it can be on anything, just so you know. I think I see a brain moving over here. Yes, ma'am.
I just, one final note about voting, another thing that stood out to me, because the other part of the title is how we can prosper together. After the civil rights movement, white registration, voter registration rose as well. So including all voices helps everyone.
That's that saying, and I'm not gonna get it correct, but when the tide comes in, all boats rise together, something along that line. But of course, in America, the idea is that if you get what you need, then that means I'm not gonna get what I need. When in actuality, when I get what I need, we're all gonna get what we need, and all the boats are gonna rise together. Thank you for adding that. Did you have a thought? Okay, I thought your brain was moving.
But yeah, I'll wait.
Anything? Yes, ma'am.
I'll just add that in the first half of the book, there's a chapter about the financial crisis, and they talk about the origin of the banking system and how the Lehman Brothers organized with financial benefit around the slave market, and that a lot of that organization and disparity, keeping African American folks out of banks for a very long time, has generational debt. So disenfranchisement from voting is one huge cost to everyone, but keeping folks out of the financial sector is another. And I think that there were more social comments in the end about the solidarity dividend, bringing people together and how we benefit together in a social way. But I'm really looking forward to digging into some of the statistics and examples that she gives to find some ways, because it didn't come to the surface how financially we're really seeing any change. Very, very little change financially.
Reparations. Any more thoughts, yes, ma'am? Reparations.
I don't even know where to start to unpack this. On page 168, she talks about something that stuck out. I didn't get a chance to come to the first reading, but this is something I teach this stuff. And I was teaching at JCC, and I moved here from New Mexico about 14 years ago, and I was working on a lot of, at that time it wasn't called D&E, but because we had such a large population of Native Americans, and that's usually who I usually work with, and how I actually got my job at JCC is being their keynote speaker. And I was teaching at JCC for about 5-6 years, and their race and ethnic relations in America, and their sociology class and their cultural anthropology class. So my plate was kind of full, and I'm retired now, so I don't have to teach. But I enjoyed it because many of my students were from the surrounding rural areas where I live out near JCC. And many of my students were white from those areas, and teaching them about the many things, one of these actually name's Crystal Starr. So nice to meet you guys. Hope to see you guys again. On 168, she says, white people are the most segregated people in America. That's a different way to think about what has perennially been an issue cast with the opposite die. People of color are those who are segregated because the white majority separates out the black minority and excludes the Chinese, forces indigenous Americans onto reservations, which I have lived for about 14 years, expels the Latinos. That stuck out to me like a sore thumb because when you look at the disparity that happens, also another person I use in my class is Dr. Ruby Payne, unpacking, if you guys ever heard of her, unpacking the framework of poverty. And when you start looking at different populations who typically are on the outskirts of mainstream society, you start to see the same patterns, class pattern fallout, value systems and class systems that affect everybody the same way. So when I found out, actually my sister out in California, she teaches anthropology and sociology. So we get into these deep conversations and I was telling her, I said, Lori, did you see this woman? I was so excited when I heard her on a podcast and TED Talks. And she says, yes, I'm using it for my class. I said, great, we're on this, that's why we're sisters. So anyway, not from the same mother, but definitely from the same universe or matrix. But so anyway, I thought that was very powerful in how separation is actually not only disastrous for everybody. How about that? It's not only disastrous for everybody, but it makes and allows this thing called racism, which we all know at this point is subjective, right? It's very subjective. It's a social construct. It's something that we've made up. In reality, it's not a real thing, the race thing, but it is a real thing when it becomes politic and it becomes an agenda, and then it becomes a system, and then it becomes a disease that everybody has. And to unpack that is going to take everybody, not people of color, not people who are on the outskirts. It takes people who look like the opposite of what we look like. Because if you notice, when you start talking, the volume button goes down, unless there are people like you who actually want to hear this and actually want to feel it. And that's what I think this takes into account. It goes beyond the intellectual, because us academics can stay up here all day. But when you take it into the heart, that sacred heart, then we become, all of us become the same spirit with the same voice. And that, to me, is what it takes to make a strong point to a large party called a government, transatlantic companies, big pharma. They have to hear our voice as a unit, not just one warrior out there. And anybody knows wise warrior, if you go and see that the enemy's out there and it's 1,000 of them, the wise one turns around, tucks tail, and goes back and gets an army, right? So that's all I want to say on that point, but I'm sure we're going to get into it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So many good things to comment on from there. The couple of things I thought, just the segregation. You know, you mentioned that that she has in her book, and if you all read the book, she mentioned that the most segregated group are white people. You know, and then the other thing that you mentioned, and I can't develop them all out, but it was just good stuff. The other thing though is the unit. It takes all of us. Right. So that was actually one other thing. It takes all of us in the unit. It takes all of us as a unit. You know, addressing these issues in order to actually see some real change. Did you have something?
Oh, that was a lot.
Good stuff.
In my chapter 7, there's several things that really stood out. Did everybody in here get a chance to read the book, at least some of the chapters? Yeah, I see head nodding. Great. Few people understand the extent to which government at every level forced Americans to live apart throughout history. Forced. That word forced.
Yeah.
You can't live here if you black. You can't live here if you Indian. You can't live here if you're Chinese. Where I grew up at was in Chicago, Illinois. And we were a melting pot. But each part of Chicago was divided up. We had Jewtown, we had Chinatown, We had Germantown. Every piece of Chicago was divided up. You had the south side, the north side, the east side. In all of those pieces, all blacks wasn't allowed to live in each place. If you was Latino, if you was black, you wasn't going into the Latino area. It just wasn't allowed. You got to cross over into their territory. You had to be like asked or invited to come in. Same way with the projects, with the Bloods and the Crips. You're not just showing up here or there when you want to. But government did this. People were forced to have their own little piece in order to survive. Black people was forced to have their little piece in society by the government, sometimes by any means necessary. And unfortunately, those pieces that they end up taking sometimes are under the bridge, close to the factories, in swamplands, in projects, in low-income housing, in those areas where don't nobody else want to live, or places that the government said, as we found out here about a month ago here in Jackson. I hope everybody gets a chance to go back to see that city council meeting that John Willis presented here in Jackson. The travesty that the government, this local government, allowed to happen, and which is still happening today. Forced. Something has to come. And as we read through the chapters of this book, we have to begin to make a change. Once you become knowledgeable, even the Word of God says that once you get the knowledge, you're held accountable. We're all held accountable. Once we get the knowledge and we know that it's wrong or others have been wrong, make the wrong right.
Thank you. I was just thinking, one thing that Vita mentioned, I think, is, well, all the stuff that you mentioned, but one of the things that I thought as well while she was talking, the idea and the fact that our government would intentionally keep us apart, design, different areas for us. It's clear, 425 something plus years later today, that it was very successful in whatever they were designing. You know what I mean? This idea, even you mentioned as far as in the book at page 168, the most segregated groups. There's a design and a purpose for that, which we're seeing right now, which we've seen for the last 400 plus years. You know what I mean? And it's working. When we're apart, we can't see how alike we are. You know what I mean? Which is why we're having these conversations, because we want to keep remembering that part of our way to change and to do something different is to do opposite than what they designed. We got to be together. We got to, have these conversations with each other. We got to see that we all are alike more than different. And another thing which is why I love Heather McGee, she talks about policy. It's much more than just feel good, happy. I got a big heart and I love you, and I want to shake your hand and give you a hug. We got to, be as a unit, addressing these policies, these practices, these people who are running for office, these people who are sitting at these board tables. As a unit, we have to be addressing these issues so that we can actually see some change. Any other thoughts out there? Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Young, and she got to where I've been thinking lately. And this gets to reparations. It gets to what Hakeem you've been doing with trauma, because trauma affects the spirit. The spirit. And I appreciated when she lifted up Jim Wallace, who's somebody that I enjoy immensely. And I think it's important for white men to speak to this and to speak to it with truth and power. That's why I appreciate Jim Wallace. And he said that as long as that's the mindset, that we are still stuck. As long as white people, and I'm speaking to myself, even I, no good-hearted, well-meaning, progressive white people, me, think the issue of race is most about people of color and minorities and what has happened to them and what happens to them that we could help with. Wrong. As long as that's the mindset, I'm still stuck. And I've been listening to that. And I also appreciated then when she lifted up the rabbi, that racism actually has a dehumanizing aspect, not only for those who experience racism, but also for those who perpetuate it. Jewish tradition articulates that everyone is stamped in the image of God, or the image of the Creator, the image of the divine, whatever we want to call that. There's a notion that God is not hierarchical, but that God is the oneness of all of us. This is where I got to, because I appreciate all of the economics and the heady stuff, but when she started getting to that, we're actually talking about fixing the spirit of this nation, not just fixing racism.
Right.
We're talking about fixing the spirit of this nation, the spirit of our communities. And in that spirit, thank you for putting this together, for showing up, for speaking out, and for being here this evening. I don't think we hear thank you enough, because we are being inundated with not good stuff right now. And I don't mean to step into my pulpit or my soapbox, you'll have to pardon me, but we are not seeing a lot of goodness in the world right now, but we're seeing the goodness tonight. And we're a group of people, leaders, community leaders, that are putting goodness back into this world that we desperately need. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
and if anybody needs one, I've got an extra copy.
And I'd just like to chime in because something that you said sparked something that really resonated with me too. You know, talking about racism not being, or progressivism or whatever, not being, you know, something that we need to do to fix people of color, but something we need to fix in ourselves. And I like the term that Heather used of needing cultural competency. And as a white person who grew up in all white communities, all white schools, all white workplaces, that's a fault in me. That's a lacking in me. And I'm so grateful that my granddaughter is in a school. I got a shout out to Coit Creative Arts Academy in Grand Rapids. The music teacher was nominated for a Grammy. That is a rich environment that she's growing up in, and it's 68% minority. So she is going to grow up with greater cultural competency and greater opportunity for cultural competency than I had, because she has that environment. And it is a loss to white people to not have people of color in our lives.
Ms. Starr, is that your name? Is it Ms. Starr? So Ms. Starr, she mentioned, as well as Pastor and also Becky, you know, we don't often, when we're talking about racism, and we've all read the books, we know this, so I'm just talking what we already know. We always are thinking racism as an issue for Black and brown people, something that they need to, you know, we got to solve for them. You know what I mean? As Pastor so eloquently stated. But as Heather also mentioned in her book, you know, this is really a white person issue. You know, it really is. You know, it was created by white people, designed by white people, perpetuated by white people, and actually a white people issue. 100%, as Ms. Starr, I want to call you Professor. I feel like I need to be saying Professor. Professor Starr stated, you know, we do have to do it together. You know what I mean? So it's not just, you know, yes, it's a problem that impacts all of us. You know what I mean? And it was created by, and I think that the reason why we have to say that it was created by white people, because we do need them to begin to think of it as, you know, this is actually my problem, you know, versus how it's always just kind of like the thought just goes out that, okay, that's a Black and brown people problem, I don't really have to worry about it. We know that this is a problem that we all have to address, but in order for white people to really kind of embrace that, you know, that look, this is actually my issue, I love the way that she framed it, and I appreciate you for, you know, uplifting that.
Yeah, because I don't think, sorry. For me personally, I'm not sure that a lot of white people understand that it's a sickness that is in us as well. I'm still taking some ibuprofen for it. so that's the thing. I think it's both and. I think it's both and. For me anyway, it is showing up. It is showing up. When we are invited to show up and speak out and not take the lead and say we know how to fix this, but it is showing up to confront the systems that still exist, but as well as understanding that it's a spiritual sickness that affects everybody. And white people sometimes don't necessarily get that they're walking in that sickness, even as the oppressor. So, and I'll let everyone else speak, and I'll put my pulpit away.
You can keep it up.
Yes.
Any more thoughts? Panelists, any thoughts? Questions?
You know, you said something about knowledge,
Yes, ma'am.
is that knowledge is power, because what I realized teaching and doing conferences, nonviolent conferences is that once people have the ammunition, and that's what it is, because you are in a fight, once people have the information, then you have the power. You have the power once you have the information, and that knowledge is very important. And what I found in my classes and a lot of my panel discussions is that when people walk away with a gamut of information, then they feel like my students would tell me, Miss Starr, I don't know what to say. When I get into a conversation rather than a confrontation, and another person that, Jane Elliott is who I use in my classes, the blue eye, green eye, you have to have a script. Because as you said there, is that if you're not raised in an environment that gives you the competency, and there's another word I was looking for, but it gives you the intelligence, the emotional intelligence to deal with people. And I learned this in a multicultural environment from a young age. And so I've always, like Heather, been the only one in the class. But I went to international schools and left the country because my parents said, as you're growing up, Crystal, I don't want that to be your fingerprint or the blueprint or how you see the lenses that you see the world. Because once you take that away as a person, and I know as a person of color of a multiracial background, when you don't walk into a room feeling that burden, because it is a burden, racism is a burden, and what you represent as an it is a burden. You become objectified, and when you're objectified, you're no longer, again, 3/5 of a human being, you're no longer part of the humanity, And so, how do I say this? By lessening people's fear is a big one, and giving them knowledge and a script to go by helps reduce a lot of their own internal conflict on feeling embarrassed or not knowing what to say or whatever. One of their homework assignments is go to work, because I had to do this with some people from the hospital, was one of my classes, cohorts. And I said, just here, there's your script. This is what you say. And I'll guarantee you go to work and find somebody who you not click your little clique, who you always go to lunch with and blah, 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 blah. Find somebody outside of your race. Just pick one. I know they're there, and strike up, just tell them, you tell them if they have a problem, come talk to Miss Starr. Miss Dancing Star, I'll set them straight. I said, but I'll guarantee you won't have that. All of my students, I had 36 students in my class, and Miss Starr, that was the first time I've ever talked to the cafeteria lady. That was the first time I spoke with her, not at her. Like, I want peas, I want carrots, no potatoes, I'm on keto, And I said, what happened? Their faces changed. They said, you know what? We are now friends.
Yep.
I said, that's where it starts. Because the first brick that you lay, you're building the framework for a solid foundation. With any marriage or relationship, it starts with the first brick, is it not? The mortar that you put in between those bricks is spirituality. I don't care what your religion is, but the spirit that you bring to the platform, the spirit that you bring into that arena is what allows people to see their own humanity. And to me, that's beautiful. That, you're working in the spirit of whatever your creator is, Matrix, Mother, God. And we're all an image of that, are we not? And so that's what I impart on my students, is that's where we start this. And then it'll open up the conversation for other things harder than racism. Because then people feel united in the spirit of their humanity. I'm not gonna go on, but I am. It's gonna be a night.
Thank you. That's some good conversations tonight. Anything more? Any other thoughts that are bubbling up, or any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Brown. With reading the book, I thought it was definitely an eye-opener. I especially loved the swimming pool analogy because I think it was definitely a great analogy as far as demonstrating the zero-sum mentality that Heather McKee was talking about. And it also has brought, especially with current events, with COVID bringing about the Great Resignation, and then hearing so many people saying people don't want to work, I say, okay, people don't want to work for crappy wages and crappy managers and dysfunctional coworkers. There, I finished the sentence for you, right? I ruffled a few feathers doing so, but in the past, especially with the abortion debate, usually, people said that they didn't believe in it, and I try to be polite about it. I'm kind of like now, I'm just to the point, it's like, I'm done being polite. I'm over it. I've been guilty of kind of throwing a few nasty ones at a couple people just because I'm having a lifelong frustration because trying to be polite because that's how I was raised. That's what my German mother and my American dad tried to reinforce, but it's obviously it hasn't worked. And I mean, even for myself, even where I'm working in the department where I'm working with mostly millennials, I am finding I'm dealing with some subtle age discrimination. I mean, even before looking for work, after working at a nice steady job for 20 years, I'm gainfully employed, paying my bills, just like they say that you're supposed to do. Then, when the doors close, and then suddenly, when you have to apply for unemployment benefits, then you're a welfare leech, which is a horrible thing to be called. It's like, I've grown up in a middle class family. It's like my parents, my aunt and uncles, they've been educated. Some of them retired with pensions. Whereas me being Generation X, I found by the time that I graduate from college, okay, the ladder's being yanked up. Why is this? We were promised the world. And even when searching for work, it's like, okay, ask how much you're making, and then they're kind of scared off. It's like, okay, translation, too expensive, too old. I mean, not they're gonna say as much, but at any rate, even at my workplace, I've had to speak up because I have found, and I've had to say to the HR manager and my manager, say, I don't feel included. This is not right. It's aggravating my anxiety and depression. It's like, okay, if I have to pull out the Americans with Disability Act to protect myself, then so be it. I mean, normally, you hear people say, oh, these people are just whiners, but it's like, you know what? I'm tired of toughing it out and suffering in silence. And especially hearing in the news that some of these billionaires say, well, let's hope that the economy turns so that way these people be desperate to come back to work to us. I am just so repulsed and disgusted beyond belief. And it's like, no, I don't want to go back. It didn't work before. We got to move forward. I'm tired of the sit and spin nonsense. I'm sure everybody else is too.
Thank you. No, thank you. You brought up some really good points. When we think about the system of racism itself, one of the things you talk about just ageism and just different things you deal with. It created so many other things, in our society. It created this framework for so many other ways to discriminate and to harm, us, which just gives us other, ammunition. That's why we really need to work together as a unit, as the professor said, to fight all these systems, because they do harm us, individually and then collectively. They really do. Any other thoughts?
My name's Pat, and this book, I don't even know what to say because I learned so much, and I see how intertwined all this crap is, and I also see, not just from a historical perspective, which it is a mind blower, but like, what are we gonna do about it? That's what I wanna know. It's like, we have people here, can we do something about it? That's my question.
Good stuff too. Good question. Actually, I was literally thinking of you.
So that was my assigned chapter. Just to talk about the solidarity dividend. And I think that Heather did a really good job of summarizing on page 271. So all of you with copies, you can read so that you can understand my words. But I think it's really hard to even get started, right? I just want to honor what you're saying. You being overwhelmed by the system and not knowing how one person can make a difference is where we start, right? Acknowledgement, acknowledging our part in it, and then acknowledging that it's broken and that we need something new. So aiming for doing the new thing together was her number one. White people can't fix it. It's not ours to fix for other people, we have to do it together. And then the second is, the quickest way to get there is to refill the pool of public goods, right? So there are a lot of examples in the book of which public goods have been emptied.
Right.
So there's empty housing. There's empty access to financial institutions. There's empty access to good information sometimes. I mean, I'll put my library hat on for just a second, but making sure that people have access to all the things that they need is one way to fill the pool, taking the library hat back off again. There are schools, access to good schools, talking about the cultural competency and growing up in diverse schools actually helps everyone. I love those examples, and making sure that maybe funding structures change for those public goods.
Right.
And that begins where? It begins with representation and voting, right? So talking about voting rights and access to the ballot box, making sure everyone retains that and then is informed about the issues that people don't want to talk about. So pressing for those answers about policy, being informed, asking the questions, and then voting. I think all of that is in here. So the third one is that people are not standing at the same depths. So we have to resist the temptation to use a universal instrument to attain a universal end. That's a pretty big one. To me, the one size does not fit all, because we are not starting from the same place. And that can take a long time to just kind of think through and identify where we are different and what we need. I think the first thing that I can do is to not feel a threat of loss. Sometimes I have a hard time with that, and I work on it daily. I think that that's something that I can commit to. Like, how do I move from where I am? I can commit to that knowledge that it's gonna be uncomfortable.
Right.
And I'm probably gonna feel that loss, but I was reminded recently that a tiny step away from where you are, with a different perspective, is not a big change. It feels big because it may be the first time you do it, but it's actually very small. So just reiterating that the work is getting on the same page. So we've tried the do-it-yourself. Like, I can talk about my story, I can talk about what I understand, you can talk about yours, but until we both understand each other, then we're not talking about the same thing. So I feel like we're all gonna start that journey in a different place, and I'll have a different amount of time before we get there, wherever there is. I think that seeing that this is a journey where we take steps together, that takes a long time, that there is no real end. We're never gonna have achieved everything, that there will always be work to do.
I just come back from a conference up in Boyne, actually today, I got back home today. And thankfully, DEI and anti-racism conversations are happening everywhere. You know what I mean? That's all we're doing is talking about it. But it's, you know, it's the beginning, you know what I mean? That's where you have to start. But one of the speakers who spoke, now, you know, when you're talking to black folks, we always have a whole list of things that we can do to get things changed. But one of the things that she mentioned is why we also are having these conversations while we partner with the library. It starts with awareness, you know what I mean? So you do have to become aware, you know, and it doesn't go from awareness to action right away. It doesn't go there, because a lot of times when you go from awareness straight to action, you're doing more harm. Because you haven't analyzed, you haven't thought about, you haven't addressed your own part in it, you haven't been honest with yourself about how am I perpetuating these systems, and kind of done the grieving and the stress of, you know, recognizing that you are a part of the systems, you had been perpetuating them, you just haven't done all that work, you know what I mean? But a lot of times we do want to go from awareness, oh my God, all this stuff is so bad, let me do and that's good. We do want you to, you know, your hearts to go there, but you do have to do some analysis and some self-reflection and some, you know, so we want to do that. But while we're doing those self-reflections, one of the thoughts that I had about Ann tonight, we can also, there are some things that we can do, you know, so like we're having these conversations tonight, you know, bring somebody with you, bring a person with you, because you say, hey, look, these are actually very important conversations, and we know that it starts with awareness. You know what I mean? After you bring somebody with you or while you're bringing someone with you, because we can actually chew gum and walk at the same time. Some of us are multitaskers, you know what I mean? But while you're bringing people with you and you're reading these books and things, you know, there are issues that are happening in the community all the time. Make sure you're voting. Make sure that when you vote, that you are going out there and you're voting for people who stand on values and issues that progress racial equity, that progress racial justice. You know what I mean? So you got to do some studying of them, but you've been doing you've been becoming more aware. You know, we're becoming more aware, you know, of these issues. So when you are looking at your candidates that you're getting ready to choose to vote, you know, because we got an election, Tuesday? Make sure that they are people who are advancing these types of issues. And if they're not, don't vote for them. Then there are other things. You know, there are people on Facebook in different places. Jackson is a Facebook community. So some of us are on Facebook. A lot of us, as Ann mentioned, are leaders here in the community. And we put a lot of stuff on our page about issues and things that are going on in the community that we could use your support in. Tonight, we're going to ask you all before you leave to fill out a comment card saying how wonderful and amazing Keisha is. No, I'm just kidding, not Keisha. How wonderful and amazing these conversations are. Because there are people who don't want to see me have these conversations. You know what I mean? So, and that's something that you can actually do. That's something that you can easily do. Fill out the comment card, say, yes, we need to have these conversations. But then follow people who are advancing this type of work and say, okay, how can I get involved? Sometimes it's a matter of coming to the school board. Some of you all don't know, but I'm a school board member here in town. Coming to the school board and say, hey, look, listen to her. Or however you want to word it. You know what I mean? You don't have to say listen to her. But there are some issues that really are happening in education. And as we begin to connect the dots of racial equity, we recognize that some of those primary areas that keep these things perpetuated are in education, are in housing, are in obviously economics, you know what I mean? So when we're in those spaces, that racism continues to advance forward, racism advances forward, we can place ourselves in those situations and be part of the people who are stopping it by saying, hey, look, no, that's wrong. This is wrong, that's wrong. And we know that one of us can't do it alone, but when we come as a unit, thank you, Professor, when we're here as a unit, you know, Pastor, thank you as well, then we actually get some things accomplished. So those are some things we can do, but we do want to make sure that we're aware. Make sure we do our own personal work. It's very important that because we will go from awareness to action, and we are causing harm. I mean, I can't tell you, you know, we work in this work a lot of times. I'm sure Professor, as well as us at the table, you know, we've had some allies, you know, we call our white brothers and sisters allies who have done a little bit of reading and jump out there and it's like, let me pull you back. I need you to go do some analysis and some self-reflection and some, because now you're causing harm. And then when I call you in, you know, I mean, you're offended and now we got all the, you know, so, but all because we just didn't do that self-analysis and that work before we, you know, but there are some things that we can do to advance this work forward even while we're doing our learning. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
See her hand up too.
Oh, we're at.
So I came to the last one, and one thing that you said was you gotta start by educating yourself. And so I try to do most of my homework this time, and I read the book. And so it does start there. And even in the book, it was addressing that, you know, you have to do the work yourself. You have to educate yourself before you can try to change other people or change. And there was one example was this woman was crossing the street, saw 3 large black men entering a flower shop, and she was like, immediately terror struck her because she thought she had to go back, and her coworker was in there by herself, and she realized that was racial fear, some fear of something unfamiliar. So identifying that you have this reaction that was built into you through the system that you grew up in, and to just check yourself was kind of like what I pulled away from that, and that's another thing that you can do. So.
That's the type of inner work that we have to do, because if we're not, you know, kind of capturing what's happening in the moment and saying, oh, look, that's what I'm doing. This is actually what they're talking about, and then you know, trying to change that thought and change that perspective and change that response, then we will be just educating ourselves really for naught, because if we're not checking ourselves and we're just educating ourselves, we're still going to be operating in the same way. We'll still be, oh my God, 3 black men walked in there, let me go run and get my, you know, as opposed to, you know, 3 black men walked in there and then, oh, wait a minute, that's racial discrimination, that's, you know, some racial fear that's been ingrained in me, let me stop doing that. I'm not even going back in there, you know, she's fine, you know, and you know, just kind of checking ourselves. So then as we continue in our journey, you know, now we're actually able to do some good, you know, because we're checking ourselves.
You know, and to address what you just said is very important, because there's a difference between discernment and racial fear. As a woman myself, if you're not understanding that, and I've worked with domestic violence, you know, is that it's not funny, but it is. I don't know why SNL just popped in my head, but I have a weird sense of humor when you deal with these high pressure issues. You got to have a release valve. The difference between those two things is understanding yourself better, because this is one of the disparities of a segregated environment. If you're not comfortable seeing a face, then that face becomes foreign, does it not? You know, it's an alien to you because you're not comfortable. In our household, because my fiance, he's white, his kids are white, and so many, the racial jokes in our house you guys probably wouldn't find funny, but because we're comfortable with each other, you know, they'll say, well, oh, I forgot you're black. And what does that mean? You know, it means they forgot I was an other, you know, and many times I gotta remind them, gotta put that check in there, because when we're out in public, there's a different relationship that's coming back to me. In sociology, we call it the looking glass self. You guys seen that? How I see myself is I see myself through your reactions towards me. So in addressing what you're saying, there is a level where you have to get to know yourself and be comfortable with yourself through the lens that you see the world. Because if you don't do that, then you're always going to be either afraid of the 3 black men, or you're not protecting yourself as a woman the way you should, just being in a shop with men and there's nobody else there. Do you know what I mean? Because you can get into that, what do they call that phase where whites get into where everybody's cool, everybody black is cool because I'm not wearing the shield of racism. And then before you know it, you're putting yourself in harm in unsafe situations. I don't care what his face looks like. You know, you're not having the discernment or the lenses to look through that and see, am I safe as a woman in an environment, you know? So that's something that I think, as you were saying, is that the last conference that I went to was that we were unpacking classism. Because classism, when you start looking at classism, and that's really why Martin Luther King got his head shot off, is because he started seeing that poverty puts us everybody puts us all in the same category, you know? And so with that, then we see ourselves as SAME, as same. And so now we're fighting a system, something that's a system. When it's a system, it becomes embedded. It has structure, what we call institutional racism. It's an institution that has actual agencies, that have think tanks to put these things together, put politically together so that they can carry out an agenda. And then they have people who have heads, there are faces to this thing, this monster, who actually carry this out. Now, I don't know how humane they are, but that's a whole nother conversation on spirituality and something else. And I'm not gonna get into that. I'm gonna leave that one to you. So that is what I kind of wanted to say about that, is that classism, unpacking what you say is our internal thing, because that is, if you're raised in a certain, that's what Dr. Ruby Payne talks about, the different classes and the different classes, stratification of structure, stratification of income, stratification of values, big one. You know, they say you can take the person out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the person. If you've ever heard that, or the horse to the water, and can't make them drink. Well, that's a big issue that you have to start unpacking, is classism and what you're comfortable with because you've been raised in that orientation or that environment. I was raised with educated parents who were very articulate and who were Black Panthers in LA. So I grew up in LA, so I'm always gonna be militant. A little bit of Crystal's gonna be militant. But, you know, I'm trying to tamper that down as I look at 60 the next 2 years. But you know what? But I'm still that warrior, that, and all of us have to be that warrior, Black, white, Jew, Gentile, male and female. And once we get comfortable seeing our faces, then you're comfortable inside yourself. We're very comfortable inside ourselves. Obviously, in our household, I live in Hanover. Need I say more? I can't go get the mail because the people coming down Moscow stop because there's a Black woman getting the mail, so I don't get the mail. Does that bother me? Slightly, you know, but I'd much rather be bothered than dead, you know? And Jackson is a hop, skip, and a jump away from Hanover, you know, Moscow Road. But the reality, that's what I'm saying, getting back to our safety, the reality is I'm not gonna be the front line of taking a bullet for the cause. And that's what I tell my students, when you go out, make a friend, make a human connection, you just don't walk up and say just about anything because you have the script. Some things you don't say at the barbecue, okay? And I have to let my white fiance know, you're not being taken to the barbecue saying that, okay? Because I'm not going to have to deal with the repercussions of Big Mama saying, well, you brought that white boy in here saying shit like that. Didn't you teach him? Some things you got to work on. They're minuscule baby steps to get to the bigger picture. And I think that's why God sent him to me, because I really don't know what we're doing together. But
Without a doubt, I'll come right back to you. But without a doubt, we thought that the conversation and the work was simply reading books, If Professor Starr didn't show us already, it's nuanced and there's so much, there's so much. We don't forget our just regular safety as human beings, but we also have to address, is this racial bias? And so it's always so much in there that we have to do. So there's so much work, there's lots of work to keep doing, but we do have to do the work. We can't avoid it simply because, it's just this is a human reaction that I'm having that to an actual fear that I should have. Is this racial bias? What is it? We do have to analyze that stuff, which is why we don't want to just start reading and then jump right into action. We need to read and analyze. Okay, what am I experiencing here? Why am I thinking this thought? How should I be concerned, or should I be concerned? Like to anything, we do have to analyze and do that work so we can know who we are, in this whole process.
You just gave me something else to think about, but I'll go with my original thought. Because I think that for me, it was that I felt like I was a good person, and then I thought that my family was good people, and then I realized the racism that why I was swimming in my entire life, and I wanted to get back that feeling of being a good person. So I could read a few books and be done with my journey. But then I realized, it's a lifelong journey. Okay, so that's sort of what I wanted to lift up, was that it's a lifelong journey. There isn't a, I do this and then done. It's all a lifelong journey.
well, that's what my fiance said to me when we talked, because my whole house is bell hooks and this and this, it's everywhere. And he says to me, well, I'm done with the black issue because I got you.
Right.
Oh, what?
Right.
And a lot of times, now that we're in this age of everybody dating everybody, you know what I mean, or marrying everybody, that's another thing we have to unpack with this. And I might hook up with you or you to start a conversation about interracial dating and interracial, what the scripts, what comes with that. Because I'm starting to realize that a lot of people say, well, if I'm having sex with this person, then I'm done with my racial issues.
That's a good first step.
It is. I mean, I'm like,
Connection you were talking about.
yeah, I'm like, I'm not quite sure how to take that because I'm feeling some kind of way right now. My armpits are kind of sweaty, and I'm not sure if I'm off with you, but I'm with you and I gotta go home with you.
Right.
Really that conversation, unpacking that is like, how am I dealing with that as the minority person in the relationship?
Is this before or after the marriage?
We're not married
We're not
yet.
married yet.
And
Oh.
if he keeps
So
messing
still,
up,
yeah.
we're not getting there. So he better watch out with his race card.
That's definitely another conversation
Yeah.
that should definitely be had because there's so much.
I didn't mean to make light of the
No,
situation.
there's definitely a lot of
Yeah, there's a lot of people
interracial
think they get the pass
yes.
because, the cliche is, well, I have two black friends, so I'm cool,
Yes, that's right.
or
I read a
our
book.
children, his children say, well, I read a couple of the books that you have around here, and I'm like, no, Sean, even though you're a doctor, you need to have this conversation with me. And we need to unpack this. One of our children came to, I said, you need to come take my class, Emily. You need to come take my class. Before the second week, she's like, oh my God, we're talking about dad. I'm like, go sit down. Sit down.
That's one of the things I think that Pastor mentioned, and like you said, we can't read one or two books and think that we've arrived. And we all know this. So I'm speaking to the choir here, but we live in a society where everything that we have learned, all the education that we've gotten from kindergarten, pre-K up, experiences that we had from while we were in the womb until birth, and then after, everything that we've experienced here is from a white supremacist viewpoint. Everything, black people and white people. That's all we've ever had.
Right.
It's been from a white supremacist viewpoint. And so when we're talking about, trying to shift our mindsets, trying to balance out, what am I experiencing here? Is this a racial fear, or is this just a womanly concern that I actually should have? We're talking about trying to analyze all that stuff. I mean, we're not going to figure it out in two books. We're not going to figure it out in 1 year worth of reading. We're not going to figure it out in a lifetime. That doesn't mean, though, because that's one of the things that I get concerned about. It doesn't mean that there is not actual work, actual actions that we can take. So there's stuff that we can do, but in the process of that, we do want to have grace for ourselves, recognizing that, I'm going to make mistakes still. I'm gonna still say some things that I probably shouldn't say. I'm still gonna offend somebody, because some things they're just there. You can't have a lifetime of nothing but a white supremacist view. Then read a couple books, participate in Racing for Equity. The group, have great conversations and collect a couple black friends, or get a black or a white spouse. I have 6 biracial children. They're all white. There's 6 biracial children. But you can't have those type of relationships and think, okay, 5 years of being married to a white person, and so now I'm good, or being married to a black person, now I'm good. No, it's a lifetime of a journey that we are definitely all on. Any other thoughts out there?
I was thinking about what everyone had to say, and with Heather, she felt what she felt at a very early age. 3rd grade. From 3rd grade to an all-white school, then an all-black school, then to college, then international school. Every place she went, she was trying to fit in, be a part of. And I believe in all that she learned, it made her the person that she is today. So I know, like, you're just starting to see and to feel. You're just starting to see and to feel this thing. Once you see it and you start to feel it, it started opening up your eyes real quick, faster than her. Because there's so many things that has to be undone, that's been done to black and brown people, that unpacking the biases. It's like a suitcase that you unzip, then you just start taking all the stuff out, good, bad, and in between, so that you can repack it.
Right.
With the things that you need in this lifetime, that your kids and your grandchildren will need, that will make the difference in our lives, especially now. With the vote that's coming and the things that I needed at the table, money is needed to be able to continue the work that we do. Work is needed for our teachers, for our schools, for all our institutions and our systems. Our systems have failed us. Our systems are broken and they need to be repaired. The right people have to sit at the tables so that we can get the things that we need.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Well, I would just add to that racism, these are Heather's words, racism prevents the coalition building that is needed to bring new ideas into reality. And as long as we allow that racism to divide us, there is so much good that we can do for all of us that will never happen because we simply can't see beyond our own self-interest. And I like what she said also about diverse groups being stronger because people come to them anticipating differences. And when groups are less diverse, there's kind of a groupthink and an expectation that we're all on the same page. But if you go into a room where you know somebody's thinking differently from you, you will listen, hopefully, and have dialogue and work out those differences.
Thank you. Yes. Any other thoughts out there?
Sylvia here again. I've definitely found it quite enlightening as far as hearing about, doing the work. It's like just reading a book or two is not going to resolve it. It kind of reminds me of 12-step meetings that I attend from time to time. I remember a saying in one of the books, I think it was from an Alcoholics Anonymous book, that somebody said, before I could overcome the alcoholism, I had to overcome the other isms. And you're thinking about it, it's not, and the racism, well, all the other stuff, it's like, discriminating weight. It's like even say a female coworker, go to a male coworker and say, oh, this woman's shirt's too tight, and I mean, degrading this other person. It's like, okay, maybe she's on medication that makes her gain weight. Maybe she has a hormonal issue. Is it really gonna help? No. I mean, just use your ridicule just to try to temporarily boost yourself up because you're insecure? That's insane. I mean, yes, the internal work, because heck, even when I was younger, I was guilty of it myself, and of course, being a stupid teenager, I mean, thankfully, I've learned over the years and hopefully be a little bit wiser and smarter nowadays, at least I hope, but at any rate, yeah, as all the other isms, I think there's just so much fallout from it. And I've signed a lot of online petitions. There's sometimes I get a little too creative and a little nasty with some of the language I aim towards some of the Republican politicians, but I'm kind of to the point. It's like, you know, let's talk about that elephant in the living room, because trying to sidestep around it just isn't solving anything. It's like it just seems like it gets worse. I figure, well, if I could use my white privilege to kind of suck it to some of these jerks who are causing so much pain and misery for everybody, then so be it. I'm willing to step up and do it. Thank you.
Good for you, Sylvia.
I appreciate that. A couple of things that you mentioned. One, this is the last thing, definitely, we're not doing this alone. We have to do this together. And part of the together, we all have different jobs, you know what I mean? What we want is acknowledging and being aware of what our jobs are, being aware of what the issues are, being aware of our white privilege and how we can use that white privilege to address these issues. Is one thing that I appreciate you for saying. And then also you mentioned that when you were younger, and we all were stupid teenagers at some point. All of us were, you know what I mean? But the thought that came with that was that when we're doing this work, and I like to always try to address this over and over again, we're all gonna feel like stupid teenagers doing this work. We're all gonna feel like, okay, I said that wrong. And I know I said it already before, but it's really important because a lot of times we'll get to saying, I don't know what to say, I don't know how to address it, and then we'll stop. And then the work doesn't get done. So as long as we are okay with and okay with failing, because we're gonna fail. We're gonna have a conversation, so we're gonna piss somebody off, it's gonna happen. You know what I mean? But as long as we are okay with that and being aware of that we're human, so we're gonna make these mistakes, and that we're gonna keep moving beyond it, then we will continue to see this work move forward. Thank you so much for your comments.
That's why this
Yes,
is
ma'am.
important.
Yes, ma'am.
What you
Excuse me.
guys are doing, that's why somebody, no,
Oh,
I was just saying, you need to have forums like this, because you think about it, we live in a soup of this stuff. So if we have an everyday or every week conversation and the community is coming, it will lessen those faux pas.
Yes.
It will lessen those Michigan, potholes that you feel like with the racism conversation you fall into, or hit with your car, it's just like, the more you have these forums where there are, like I tell my students, you're in safe, Miss Stars, what happens here is like Vegas, kinda. That's what I tell them about my name. Right. You wanna know the joke or you wanna know the real? This is my day job and I don't work a pole, so now we got that out of the way. Is that these forums help us feel safe, right? We're here and I'm getting to see faces that I'll probably see in Walmart or whatever. And when you see somebody that you see in these forums, don't pretend like you don't know who they are outside of here. Because that's happened so much. We feel so comfortable and cozy and warm and we're talking sort of about this. Then I see you in Walmart. I'm not asking you to sit there and have a whole conversation with me, but because we made a human connection tonight, if I see you, I'm gonna reach out and say, hi, Pastor. How are you, sweetheart? When you make that human connection with people, then when you're in an environment, you're gonna feel safe in your own space because you've made the community has made a safe space for you to speak, and it's okay here to say something like, I don't want Fred Sanford living next to me either. I don't care what color he is. Is that a class issue? That's okay to say that. Let's talk about that. He was junkie. See, he's just junkie. That's where I lived. That's a class issue. And when we talk about redlining, that's what I was a realtor for a while, and that was a big issue that they didn't want to talk about, which I knew, the redlining that happens. But because it's illegal to do that, you find ways to get around it.
Oh, yeah.
And then your cut you don't have clients that know you're looking out for them. Do you see? That's how racism is embedded. It's insidious, like funky smoke. You know, it seeps in. And then if you're not aware of it, to call it out, Sylvia, that elephant in the room, baby, and say, you know what? I work here, and if that's what we're doing, my cut from my client is not that important. But you see, not everybody's going to do that, right? Not everybody's going to speak up. That's how pay wage disparity happens. Because if you're getting paid, Chrissy, and I'm getting paid, and you're getting paid more, and we're on that same line putting together those damn parts for a car, she's not going to speak up because she's white and getting more pay. And I might be stepping on toes in here, whoever you may be. And you know that if you go to the boss man and you say, you know, James over here, he's a good worker. We sit down and have lunch every day. That's what she was saying about the union workers. You see this kind of mess in unions, you know, major. Because the union's supposed to be there to what? Support your back, right? But then you know if you getting paid cheddar more, huh, Chrissy? You're going to keep your mouth shut. Loose lips does what? Sink ships, right? That's what I'm saying is that's where it starts in the community. We all have to stand up, and when we see that, Sylvia, and say, you know what, this isn't cool. I might be getting something. He's not getting something. That's where the sum of us. And then we wonder, we sit around and say, well, you know, I didn't cast the stone. But we do what? We hide the hand.
We're definitely getting some good teaching tonight, some
I didn't mean to.
No, some tangible, you know what I mean?
I can't. This is my stuff.
I'm
sorry.
But we're getting some tangible.
We're gonna
here
close
tonight,
the doors of the
you know?
church, huh, Pastor?
You did this at book club.
I did.
Professor Starr, you know, she mentioned a few things, you know, that we really, I don't know how much the book even addresses them just yet, but you know. When we get to the space, and we'll probably have these conversations next year, because the next book I don't know that it's going to address this as much.
We gotta wait
But
a whole year.
No, we do have another book coming, but we might. This is some deep stuff when we're talking about reparations, and we're talking about calling out that elephant in the room and being able, and also being willing as white people, you know, because again, we're not doing this alone, but saying, you know what, I'm getting paid more than this person is. We're doing the same job. We got to address that, you know what I mean? Or stepping aside from some positions and saying, you know what, no, this person needs to have, like, that's some deep stuff that, you know, eventually is going to have to happen. But, you know, we're not having that conversation tonight, but Professor was speaking. She was giving us some other ideas and things we have.
See what you did, Sylvia?
See, you carry one too, don't you? I got one in my pocket.
I just wanted to bring in some thoughts not in this book either, right? Like when you're talking about relationships, you're talking about building a relationship with anybody, whether it's your partner, you know, or someone you don't know. One of the tools that we talk about here at the library is using John Gottman's theory. So he's a relationship psychologist. If you do 5 positive things, it will balance out the one dumb negative thing that you do. Like you have to do the 5 things just in case, because you know you're gonna do that one dumb thing. You know it's gonna happen. So you gotta put, our training calls it pennies in the cup, right? So if you put the 5 pennies in, then that gives you a tiny barrier, a little bit of safety, a little bit of comfort for when you totally screw up. And so I just think about that every day. That's the small thing I can do to put pennies in the cup, to talk to people that are different from me, to get to know people, to try to make time to stop thinking about my to-do list and start really listening to people and ask questions and try to learn. So that's.
I love that, the pennies in the cup idea, you know, because also when you're putting those pennies in the cup with other people as we're building relationships, when you do that one dumb thing, that, you know, that 6th thing that's really dumb, because you've been putting those pennies in the cup, now those people are a little more apt to, you know, forgive you. You know, they probably really didn't mean this, to give you more grace, because you've been showing that, hey, look, you're actually, you know, putting pennies in the cup, you know, versus if you were not ever, you know what I mean, you're just doing dumb things, you know, then the grace is, you don't have as much grace for those people, you know what I mean? I love that idea of, you know, making sure that we're doing as much good as we possibly can often, because we know that we are going to mess up. We're humans. It's going to happen, you know. Any other thoughts? I want to make sure we save some time for what's the thing that we said we need them to do?
Fill out the comment
The
card.
comment card. Yes, I want to make sure we save some time for that. But any other comments? Yes, ma'am. Especially from anybody who has not spoken yet, like you, ma'am.
Because I never do, this is very difficult for me, but I would just say from the other side, I will never call anyone out ever about anything, that's just not me. But I think that constant bombardment of just small, little, subtle things over and over and over again has a powerful impact as a whole, even if you're not gonna be someone that's gonna stand up and make, like you said, call someone out, or, because that's not something I would ever do.
100%. It works, all our personalities, just as human beings, the reason why, life is so interesting and amazing at times is because we all have so many different personalities. We need those people who are calling people out, and we need those people who are not. We need all of us to be doing it, and we all have a part to play. I think we talked about this last time. We all have a part to play. Some of us our calling out might be just in letters. Some of us, our calling out might be in our, on how we show up. How we show up personally, how we are conducting ourselves, because, those around us are recognizing, they're acting different, and we don't have to say anything, but because we've done a lot of work on our own selves, we, analyze ourselves, and we are, considering how we move, and then we begin to move differently throughout the world. That example alone may be all that we're gonna do, and that's okay. We also have to vote. We never want to forget that racism is systemic, it's institutionalized, so we have to do our voting. You can do that in a enclosed place where nobody knows what you're doing, but you can be making changes in that space. But it does not, we don't all have to look the same, in how we respond, and how we show up, and how we have these conversations, because that would be really boring. If everybody looked like me, it would be really a very boring world. I'm a very boring person. If everybody looked like just any of us, life would be just that much less enjoyable. Don't we all like the different foods, and different, different cultures that we can take part in, because it makes life more interesting. And even the way that we respond, we need all differences. So don't feel like because you don't show up as somebody else that you're not doing enough, or that you're not doing what you ought to be doing. Show up and do the work on yourself, and it's still working, it's still helping, it's still changing, lives in our society. Did I have another thought before I, yes ma'am? And I am trying to get people who have not spoken yet, just so you all, because we are getting ready to come to a close. No, don't be quick.
My name is Bethany, and I think I mostly just want to say thank you to Keisha and, was it Becky?
Yes.
Davida and Ann for showing up and for doing this work. I think to speak to my fellow white people in the room, I'm probably 6 or 8 years into my journey of understanding these concepts, and when I read a book like this one, I could only read it a chapter at a time, and I'm only 6 chapters in, just to acknowledge I'm not through it yet, because it's so overwhelming to me how I read the pool stuff, and it just makes me angry. But I guess to remind everybody that it's a marathon and not a sprint, and that's something that I have to remind myself. And again, as a white person, knowing that I need to show up and listen, I just have so much to learn, and I truly credit people in this room for coming alongside me on the journey. And I am one of those people, because I can and am pretty vocal generally, that can also put my foot in my mouth and say things. And as a perfectionist, that really, I can be very uncomfortable in speaking up in spaces, but also make myself do it at times because it's important. So I guess one more quick thing to say that I do tend to get when I'm speaking with other white people who maybe have racist or biased opinions, I can get very frustrated and angry and emotional, which drives me crazy. And one of the things that I found is to step back and ask questions. So instead of me feeling like I have to defend or whatever, ask those prompting questions, and I have found that to be more helpful to get me through those and maybe actually get a point across versus just getting really angry and frustrated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other thoughts from our panel? We have one up here, you said?
There was a person up here that raised their hand.
Okay.
Did you
Oh, I
still
did?
wanna? You
I
did?
did a while back. This is an overwhelming discussion, and it's been taken, I got my teacher voice on, I need this. It's been taken many different places, and I didn't purposely take notes tonight so I can absorb and listen. So I don't quite know how to process everything. I would ask the white folks in the room, you're not honestly surprised by anything you read, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay, I mean, that's encouraging.
I-
And some are, okay, well, that's the beginning, that we've already covered that tonight. I'm also a professor, and I know it was refreshing to see a lot of what I studied in this book because it was a rare book that brought together the theories behind why we are what we are in a way that can personalize it for folks. Because I've known that pool story. I've known that pool story so much to dismiss it. I forgot about it. And when I see it in this context, I'm like, oh yeah. And this is on page 83, I think it was. It's I know you guys talked about it last month. But we're all used to, well, I'm going to talk about white supremacy another time, get some reactions on that, but we know what white backlash is. You know, that's you mentioned the Black Panthers. We know what happened to the Black Panthers, and many of us know why it happened. And that leads to the incarceration we see now, and that's real. And that could be brushed away and ignored because when folks are in a prison, they're tucked away.
That's right.
And we know those percentages. Every white person should know those percentages. And the folks here, here's my frustration. The white folks here, how do we talk? And I know I'm on camera now. I'm just going to say it. I'm tired of it now. You know, how do we talk to those others that get their information elsewhere?
Right.
And that has driven the conversation for 50 years. People are socialized into it, and that's the only reality they know. What was I talking about? This is how my head works. You know, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to shut up soon. We know where we're. Okay, so we know it. Okay, everything I was talking about was about backlash. Nina Simone taught us about backlash. But on page 83, where she's in the park and she goes to the car, the two seniors in the car, who are looking at the very pool that's no longer there. And she looks at the pool, and then she looks back, and that window is already up. And what does she say after that? She uses the term recoil. And it's not just backlash, it's white recoil.
That's right. Overt.
And that is what many folks that look like me were raised with and grew up with. And I don't know why I am what I am now or whatever that may be, but I know what I'm not. But I'm still cowardly enough to not confront it in a couple situations. That's my issue. But this starts with white folks. And I'm glad to see many are here. We can take whatever angle we feel comfortable taking. And it's not going to end. This is a long arc of history. It goes back, it goes front. But we know what's been going on for the last 50 years. And we know how it's easy for so many of us, that's probably on that list of white privilege right there. How I stay at home and just read comic books all day and have a good time doing it. But there's got to be a point. You work within your wheelhouse is kind of what I'm getting at. You find those strengths where you can work with. Okay, now I feel like I'm preaching. I'm gonna shut up. But, you know, these are these realities that my analytical mind, my education brought me to. But it starts with a curiosity, and I don't know how to convey the importance of that to others. Mostly those that are not here. Who are, and this is what white recoil is again. It is that resentment that is stoked and stoked and stoked. And it happened when they covered them pools up in 1959. And it's taken on, it takes on the polite form now. But we know that conversation, and that's where I am stuck because we know who's generating that and how pervasive that is into the language. We're using their terms every day. They are running the narrative. Okay, but what I like about McGee is that she's a policy wonk like I am. So we have the geek outs, and there's always a constant debate, and it shouldn't be a debate, but it's also an artificial division between class and race.
That's right.
And we'll throw gender in there, and even conversations about intersectionality. Don't engage class as much, because the class is something we don't talk about. And I get frustrated with folks on the left that want to push back against diversity because they see it as on the left, because they see it. I don't know. I'm going to shut up now. But The ones on the right have their shit together. And I'm not quite sure the folks on the left do. And it's stuff, okay, this is it. I'm throwing like everything in at the same time here. My last thought, there's an idea about truth to power, right? Well, I'm gonna quote Arundhati Roy. When she throws that back, power knows the truth. And many of us do, and I think that's enough to process, and that's what I process every day. Okay, that's me. My name's Dave. Hi. How you doing today? That was my talk. Man, I don't want to watch this. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
I
Appreciate
think
it.
I said something there. I don't know.
Of course, the other professor said a whole lot too, but one of the things that the other professor said that I want to just highlight as well, and we've said this already, so it's not gonna be new, but the moral arc of justice, is that what it is? Anybody know? It's moral, it bends, and it's long. We're on a journey, and one of the things that kind of keeps me in this work is that the only way that we're actually going to get somewhere is that every generation, each of us have to keep doing this work. It can't just be that the moral arc of justice is it's long and it's gonna get there. Not if you don't do your own work. Not if you don't do your part in that process of making sure that arc actually reaches where it's supposed to reach. If we're not doing our part, then it's not going to reach that place. Which is why we keep having these conversations. Which is why we keep coming out and again having these conversations with one another. Because if we're not doing our part individually and collectively as a group to make sure that arc is actually bending in the right direction, then it won't bend in that direction. It's not just going to happen. Like you said, I love that you just said that, and that's a whole mouthful. You know, those in power already know. No. Well, I mean, it was good stuff. Those in power already know the truth. They're the ones who created these systems, designed them so that they will operate in the manner that they are operating in, so that they will be successful, so that they know the truth. You know, we still have to speak truth to power. We still have to get out there and vote. We still have to, address issues that we need to address. We still got to do our work. You know what I mean? But they definitely know the truth. You know what I mean? But we still have a responsibility as human beings. You know, not even just Americans, but as human beings, to make sure we're doing our part to make sure that our world is a place that's good for all of us. I'm going to let our panelists have any last words.
I'm just going to mention, Davida passed me this note, that I should let everyone know this group came together after attending Race Forward conference, and there's one coming up in November. So our next book conversation will be October 27th. But if you're interested in hearing, I feel like these conversations are small steps. These are beginning points. This conference is at a different level. And that helped me see that there was so much room to move from where I started, right? So you don't have to feel like you are ready to engage at that level to see what other people are doing and be inspired to do that. So I'm just gonna encourage anyone with the means and interest to pursue some of that self-education. And please write comment cards before you leave. It's really important to us to listen to you and to share your words about how meaningful this is to you. It helps us make the case to continue.
Thank you all so much for being here this evening. This is just the tip of the iceberg.